We are the most fortunate of life streams, in my opinion, upon the face of the earth. Most fortunate, not so much necessarily because of what we know, although we are grateful for what we know, but most fortunate tonight because of the ascended masters who lead us forward to our victory. Most fortunate for the rich complexion of their own example, which they set for us. Most fortunate in that they are such lovers of life themselves. They are not, as you might imagine, stoics. They do not have a mean, narrow, puritanical austerity about them that is not able to revel in the goodness of God life. Perhaps the pinnacle of this is to be discovered in our own beloved Chohan for the next 2,000 years, our own beloved Saint Germain. The magnificence of that identity which he has externalized is the witness to us, really and truly, of the purpose of life. The purpose of all of life is for the infinite one to fashion such exquisite beings, such as our beloved Saint Germain. Now, before I'm chastised for being a little bit too lavish and laying it on a little bit too thick by the Master himself, let me say that I'm pointing past just the characteristics that he has achieved to what those characteristics mean and teach us about the meaning of life and the destiny to which all of us are heir. Some of you may have indulged in a study, for example, of some of the product of beloved Saint Germain's heart of hearts in his final embodiment, that of beloved Francis Bacon. There is much that was accomplished by him in that life. For myself, I would have to treasure what he did under the pen name of William Shakespeare above all else, and would gladly sacrifice all the other advancements that he gave, scientifically and so forth, as wonderful and necessary as they have been, just to preserve intact the corpus, the body of work, which he did as William Shakespeare. Why? Because there in the closet, as he mused within his own heart as to the magnificence of God, he was able to really be who he was. He didn't have to put on the front of being a lawyer, of being a noble aristocrat, of being high-minded in terms of worldly wisdom, or all of the rest of those characteristics. He could bare his heart and bare his soul and paint for us the most rich tapestry of appreciation of the nature of life, the joy, the richness of life, of the intrinsic goodness of man, and of the great destiny to which man is heir. If one did not understand the English language, but one were to sit in a true Shakespearean presentation, a drama that's done by trained actors, they would absorb the rhythm and the cadence of the voices as they delivered their lines. That is music in and of itself. That is nobility. That is transcendence. That speaks directly to the heart, regardless of whether the mind can decipher the words or not. But when you couple that rhythm and beauty of song that is within that wonderful poetry, couple that with the imagery and the ideas, you catch a glimpse of the face of God, really and truly. Among other things, even those who study Shakespeare purely from the intrinsic value it has as literature, they come to find that they have a great appreciation for the author of the plays. They come to discover that this individual had more insight into human nature than perhaps anyone else ever before or since, and that there was a real love for the common man, if you will, a real ability to commiserate, to revel in the simple joys, the foibles of some natures, the whole vast spectrum of life, the dramas, the tragedies, the comedic, laughable situations, the great nobleness of history and the great characters of history. All of this is there within the plays. And all of it begins to give you a better glimpse into God individualized as an unascended adept and that which has gone on to be an ascended adept. Can you understand that there was so much in there having to do with flowers, with the verdant green of nature, so much having to do with little ditties of the little folk melodies of the time, so much of the vernacular, as well as so much of the noble, and so much of the mystical is there, with all of the stories about the fairies and the elves, and the kings and queens of the fairy kingdoms. All of that is there, and so much more, and so much more. But all of it comes to speak of what we're talking about at this entire conference, the love of life in all of its many, many dimensions. At the recent Acropolis Sophia, Saint Germain and the 12 Muses, as we were going through some of the works of Shakespeare, we did reveal yet another illustrious incarnation of beloved Lanello, who also has always had the soul of a poet, back to the time of Atlantis, back to Akhenaten, and on through history. This life stream has had the open heart, the window of the heart, able to speak in poetry and to distill transcendent universal truths into worded expression and the rhythm and cadence of poetry. So it should not come as any great surprise that Lanello himself acted as an assistant to Francis Bacon. He was an embodiment as rough and gruff, rough and tumble man of that time of Elizabethan England, as Ben Jonson, who actually assisted Bacon in polishing off and assembling the plays into the quartos and the portfolios to preserve them for posterity and for future generations. Ben Jonson wrote a number of plays under his own name and became the poet laureate under James I, and flew to great heights of attunement as he worked in close conjunction with beloved Saint Germain at that time. He ended that embodiment in the nick of time, just in time to turn right around and be reborn across the English Channel as the Sun King, Louis XIV. Another wonderful example of a larger-than-life life stream who had the vision to pack up the court of France, move out into a swampland, and to tame the wilderness and bring forth all of the beauties and magnificence of that French Renaissance, which came to flourish at Versailles, where there was such a flourishing of all of the fine arts. All of this should begin to help you appreciate the fact that this path is complete. There can be nothing missing in your experience. No part of your real heart's yearning is left bereft of expression. This is part of the goal of the Ascended Masters, and particularly in this class, for the light to go on, and for you to realize that outside of your tube of light, outside of the charmed radiance that is thrown out by your mighty I Am presence, and outside of the fellowship of these ascended sons and daughters, the Ascended Masters, you do not miss anything. Everything that you need to have a full and complete life is to be found within that. We have been, in a sense, answering a great deal of your questions through this class, but I am going to hurl a question not only to this group that's assembled here, but to hurl a question into the mass consciousness. And that is, why are you such dullards that you are so deaf and dumb as to not recognize what's good for you, what's happy for you, what is fulfilling and permanent and lasting? How can you be so insensate to all of the glories of the Godhead that are swirling about you? What will it take to awaken the consciousness? What will it take to stimulate the heart to realize all that is good that God pants to bestow as an avalanche of good, of every good and perfect thing upon the entire human race? As the saying goes in the Shakespeare in Love movie, which I claim that they stole this line from me because I used it before they did. But then Carolyn reminded me that Saint Germain said that he used it before I did. And that is, it's a mystery. If ever there was a mystery that I frankly don't understand, I am completely nonplussed and befuddled by human nature, which has yet to discover the magnificence of God, the mighty I Am presence, and of the great cosmic life wave that we experience and that everyone should experience. It's not as if it hasn't been around. How is it that it doesn't electrify everyone? How is it that there aren't millions of people that are beating their pathway trying to clamber in through these doors? Where are the lame ones being let down through the rafters here because there's no way to get in? What is the problem with mankind of earth that they can't know what's good for them? If anyone is ever able to answer this question for me, I certainly stand to be illumined. But as for each one of you, our goal for you is for you to finally get it through your thick skulls that everything that you need in life you can find within the God domain. That everything you need, including happiness and joy and fulfillment and ongoingness Everything can be there within the realm of perfection, within the realm of harmony and goodness. There is a certain carnal-minded cynicism and a certain absolute antipathy to this Christ light that is abroad in the land. And I'd like to challenge it in your consciousness. And again, speaking to the whole world, I'd like to challenge this momentum that has been thrust out upon the world. Perfection is taken as something to be laughed at. And I can give you a couple of examples. There is a movie that was put out recently called The Stepford Wives. And the theme of this story is for us all to sit back and chuckle at those who seem to express a rather prim and a rather proper, always letter-perfect way of expressing themselves. And that is looked down upon in its mechanical nature as being an idiotic way of trying to express. A lot of times, people make similar references to the times in the 50s when the situation comedies like Father's Knows Best and others of that nature, Leave It to Beaver, the Ozzie Nelson Family. The way things are said today is that there is no Ozzie Nelson family. I guess it's the Osborne family that is right now the ideal family that everyone should try to emulate. And so all of those things that would speak to peace, to harmony, to beauty, to order, to happiness, all of those things are poo-pooed as being, oh, those are for ordinary folk who aren't with it yet. They're not hip. They're not really with it. They don't get it. There's another example of this that was put out a few years ago, along the very same theme. It was a movie called Pleasantville. And in this movie, it never rained. It was always perfect temperature of 78 degrees or whatever it is. The basketball team, they never missed a single shot, even in their practices. The ball went through the hoop every time, and they won every game they ever played. Now, this Pleasantville, mind you, where everything was kind of orderly and perfect, was depicted in monochrome. It was in black and white, and the message being that such a world is drab. Such a world is colorless. And what it needs in order to bring some zest and zing into it is a healthy dosage of human desire patterns. Lust, all kinds of anger, people getting upset at one another, doing modern art where you have the most distorted visions. All of those things are exalted as being the antidote for the drone, drab incessantness of this perfect world of Pleasantville. And so people from the real world come in and they infect the Pleasantville world with their desire patterns and their humanness of imperfection. And one by one, this infection passes from one person to another. And only then do beautiful colors come forth. Only then do people start smiling and conflict enters their lives. But conflict is good, and you have the introduction of the inevitable tug of good and evil. I'll give you a few more examples of this because it is a very pervasive attitude that is part of the human equation upon this planet. I don't know how many stars, movie stars, I have seen being interviewed, And without exception, they all say the same thing. Maybe Charlton Heston wouldn't have said this, but he's about the only one I can think of. They say, oh, I want to play the villain because the villain has more dimension to his character. He has more conflict in his world. He's more interesting to play. I can really sink my teeth into that role and emote out of that thing. I don't want to play the good guy in the piece. This is even, in some senses, more insidious than you might imagine. Take, for example, back in the 1960s, I think it was, I might have still been in high school back then, there was Disney's The Wonderful World of Color. And on one of the Sunday night shows of the Disney program, by this time they had a whole catalog of feature films that they had done. And the theme of this particular show was that you cannot have a good movie unless you have a really powerful villain in the piece. In order for there to be a plot, in order for there to be character development, there has to be a villain. So for every Snow White, there has to be the wicked stepmother. For every one, there is a protagonist who will be in that role. And the idea is that without that kind of villainy, a story would have to be boring. A story would have to be bland and meaningless. Now, I grant you that if the movie industry, and for that matter, the whole entertainment industry, if their goal is money, and they realize that most people still are living in the great pull of their emotional bodies and want to have a fix of various types of human emotions. They have, through trial and error, unfortunately discovered that by pandering to the basest elements of the human misqualified substance, they can attract more of the faceless masses to plop down in the seats, pay their money, and sit through one dousing after another of the vanity of repeating the same old tired patterns of destructivity that repeat over and over and over again. They have discovered that for the human equation, the human part of our nature, of anyone's nature, and by that I mean the part that is not part of the divine, in order for that part to feel flow, to feel a sense of being alive, dubious though it may be, there has to be a regurgitation, a stirring of these emotions to get them moving, a cathartic expression of those baser emotions. So people go deliberately to be terrified, or they go to be mystified. They go to be horrified by what is on the screen. They go to be fixated in the human consciousness by what is there upon the screen. And I grant you that if you have a mercenary goal in mind of simply fleecing humanity of their life substance, you may well choose to pander to those base elements. But the Ascended Masters are here to challenge the lie that says that in order to be alive, you have to be engaged in the incessant and interminable tug of war of human good and human evil, of this interminable, inestimable, tired, tedious struggle between good and evil. Or that in order to have a good story, you have to have conflict of protagonists. This may seem to be true from a human standpoint, but all the while that this is going on, here below, in these outer worlds on this planet, there is an ongoingness to life that goes on and on and on and is sustained within itself without ever having to descend below the levels of harmony. There are divine rewards and divine experiences that are vastly more fulfilling and joyous than these. And so we are, for just a few moments, going to touch upon some of those things that you all have to look forward to as you rise out of those old patterns and discover, lo and behold, even though you've given up all of those desire patterns of the human self, that there's greater life to be had, greater joys to be had, greater magnificence ahead. Part of it lies in the simple understanding that what people are out after is flow. It doesn't matter if it's a bilge pump of astral substance that is plunging through the consciousness, that is a dubious form of flow. But there are pure flows of pure life and God magnificence that are coursing through the cosmos and coursing through the higher octaves that you may also participate in. And you will have the ability to be sustained in those divine flows as they move forward. In addition to that sense of flow, there are still high adventures to be had in the path of perfection. There are still worlds to conquer. There are still divine, creative tensions. That might seem to be a word that you would not expect to have used in the lexicon of the Ascended Masters, but there is such a thing as a creative tension. And the nexus of all of this is to be found in something very dramatic, which may be a little difficult to try to convey to all of you. But let's see how we do. When you stand before the living presence of an Ascended Master, and you behold, clearly etched, what an ascended being is, what a cosmic being is, and you realize that that is the destiny that you are called to, you've got a job ahead of you. You've got something to strive for. Beloved Kuthumi, after his ascension, shared with us an experience that he had early on in his life as Francis of Assisi. He said the great turning point of his life occurred one day when he was on horseback coming back from a battle. He was a rather dandy nobleman at this time, son of a wealthy merchant, who was out for some recreational warfare, as was the case of the young men of his time. And as he was coming back, all of a sudden, the atmosphere parted, and standing before him was the ascended Jesus Christ. And Kuthumi said that in that moment, he beheld the definition of man. He knew the meaning of individual manhood or womanhood, if you will. He knew what it was to be a person, to be all that was there. And he felt the contrast between what was externalized in that vision of the Christ and what he had thus far externalized. And so the truth is that there is a plot to life, a plot device that allows for creative tension, that allows for you to strive. No, it is not competition where you are out to run a race and defeat other people. It is actually a competition with yourself, with what you have realized and externalized thus far of the Godhead compared to what you know in every fiber of your being is possible for yourself. This is what you strive and push off against. This is where the creative tension is. For you realize that there is so much more for you to become. Inwardly, it's all there. It's all there in the permanent atom of the heart. It's all there in the heart flame. It's all there qualitatively. All of it is inside. But you have to strive, to stretch, to exert, to sweat great drops of blood, to bring forth all of this divinity that is within you. This is the greatest creative process that is going on in the cosmos. It is Ecce Deus, behold, the God-realized individual. God Almighty, the mighty I Am presence, all throughout the cosmos, is about a creative act. And while worlds are nice, and suns are nice, and spiral nebulae are nice, the greatest, most complete reflection of the infinite is the God-realized, individualized being that an ascended master or a cosmic being is. And God is at work within each and every one of you, faceting that divine identity. And you are at work, faceting that divine identity for yourself, and it is a full-time job. It can occupy all of your creative strivings, all of your devotion, all of your efforts. And the wonderful thing about it is you will never have a time that you would have, let's say you went to Egypt and you climbed the Great Pyramid. You climbed all night long, and finally you got up there on that little plateau at the top of the Great Pyramid. The problem is, once you're there, you can't climb any further. But the truth of the matter is that in this Ecce Deus experience of expressing the Godhead, there will never be completion. You will never totally arrive at your journey's end, because no matter how much you do come to externalize of the Godhead, there will always be greater vistas. No matter how much you have expressed, you will still always hear off in the distance the muffled drumbeat of the destiny of God calling, or the tremolo of the trumpet call, such as was talked about in the Blue Flower, calling you onward, the will of God calling you to greater and greater expression. This is your life's work for all eternity. When you make your ascension, it is not the end. It is barely the threshold of the beginning of life for you. There will be schoolrooms, there will be training, and you will find that there is so much more of God than that which you are able to contain. Lanello spoke of it last evening. He had great mastery and attainment before his ascension. Now he is a Buddha himself. He has and is possessed of a certain amount of many ascended master qualities. Amongst them, he cited the quality of peace. And yet he compared the peace, that one quality that he was able to express, in comparison to that of Lord Gautama. And all of a sudden, he knew how much more of peace there was for him to gain and to master. It's almost like that saying they used to have in the old serial westerns, that no matter how fast a gun you are, there's always somebody faster on the draw than you are. And so no matter how much you externalize of the Godhead, there will always be more and more and more for you to express. And so there is joy and fulfillment, and there is striving. You need a certain amount of conflict or challenge in your life. That is where you will always have that challenge. You won't need to challenge yourself doing a free climb up the sheer face of El Capitan. You won't need to dangle in a little rope outside of a skyscraper or otherwise challenge yourself in those types of ways. You won't need to pit yourself against your fellow brothers and sisters to outdo them. Your own expression will be the limitation. Your own expression will be the protagonist that you are always striving to be and to become more and to express more and more of the God presence. There are a number of expressions of this that the Ascended Masters have given, and I'd just like for a moment to cite a few examples of this so you begin to get the co-measurement of where you're going with all of this. One of the things I would say to you is that human conflict and human struggle, the sense of struggle, you will have to wean yourself of that sense of enjoying struggle, of enjoying conflict. Now, you might say to me, I don't enjoy struggle. I'd like not to have any struggle. Part of you doesn't enjoy it, but part of you has been so used to it for so long that if it doesn't get a little bit of a fix of inharmony or conflict or struggle, it's probably going to go manufacture it somewhere just because it's part of your life expression in the past. Well, one of the things you will have to put up with then when you get to the Ascended Master Octave, and even now when you really do learn to use the light, is that when you call the light of your mighty I Am presence to go forth, there is no struggle. There is no battle. There is no tug of war between opposing forces. There is only God the One going forth and taking its dominion wherever it is directed. And there is no human sense of struggle or conflict in that sense. There is only the fullness of ongoing mastery that can come forth. I would mention to you as well, one of the important lessons to be learned in all of this is to realize that human expressions in this world, even though they might have their momentary, fleeting pleasures, if you will, or experiences, they are quite paltry by comparison. They're poverty-stricken when compared to the divine experiences that await you. For example, it is not really possible to experience very much power as long as there is conflict in the feelings, discord in the feelings, or in the mind. Only when there has been the God control of harmony demanded of those bodies over a period of time, and only when there has been the ramrod straight altar of the sacred fire, the Kundalini fires rising up the spinal altar so that there is absolute God control, when that comes to pass, then you may begin to be touched with the immensity of power that can pour through your life stream. Imagine if you were standing at the side of Niagara Falls, all of the tonnage, the foot-pounds of pressure of the power of that flow. Imagine all of that pouring through the chalice of your individuality. Someday it shall. Someday, most likely after your ascension, you will, in your electronic body, feel that immensity of flame pouring forth through your world. And the raw power will itself be a tremendous flow of the river of life. Only it won't last just for a few fleeting seconds, but it will be as if it was the 4th of July every instant. It's quite wonderful how, at least here in America, Our Day of Independence, the day in which we celebrate freedom, the 4th of July, is associated with fireworks, with spinning pinwheels of fire and rockets and all of the rest of those wonderful things. The difference is that in this world, those things sputter out after a few seconds. Whereas when you have this kindling fire of the forces of life that have come together and fused within your world, they produce an ignition and a firing and a flaring and a flaming that is eternal. And you wear bodies of living ascended master flame, and your causal body is constantly firing off those momentums of God good that are there in that causal body. Whether it's visible or not, there is always that sheet of flame that is issuing forth from that electronic body that you are now wearing. So constantly there is that great immensity of power and light that is constantly pouring through you. And there is nothing on this world that could ever compare or compete with that once an individual has tasted the magnificence of that higher world and of that higher self. Here are just a few of the ways in which beloved Saint Germain hurled the challenge to the students in the past and is hurling the challenge to all of you today to appreciate the magnificence of life that there is to be had within the Ascended Master way of life, even here and now before your ascension. You see, the goal of all of this is to have so much going forth, so much of God from your electronic body, which is limitless, by the way, so much of it filling the chalice of your consciousness and flowing through, moving through constantly, that there simply isn't any quarter that remains for the other self, the not self, to have room to express. And that is the way in which it is intended to be. So much of God going forth constantly, always, that never is there room for anything else. When you come to be able to sense these refined tremolos of the presence of God, and you love that presence for its own sweet sake, and that is the apple of your eye, it is the pearl of great price that you would give your life for, and when you find the reinforcement in that, so that it is all that you desire and all that you need, that fills your life experience, and there is no way for anything lesser than that to lay hold upon you, to, in a vampire-like way, attach itself to your aura and begin to draw off the light. Here is how Saint Germain has put it on a few occasions. When mankind learns to live life by the one eternal law of love, they will find that such obedience will have released them from the wheel of birth and rebirth, and all of the problems of human experience will have disappeared, and in their place will come the joy of ever-expanding perfection which forever abides within love, constant new creation, ever going on, for life is perpetual motion, that neither slumbers nor sleeps, but is ever and forever a self-sustained stream of expanding perfection in joy, in ecstasy, in eternally new design. This perfect activity and joy of life are all contained within obedience to the law of love. Then the last enemy, death, will itself have disappeared, for it is but a means of release from a garment no longer of any value, when the physical body has become incapacitated. All is moving forward to greater and greater joy and perfection. Going on, he states, all of the joys, the so-called joys and pleasures of the outer world, are mere dust when they are compared to the limitless, ever-increasing wonders of creation that thunder throughout cosmic space, which the ascended masters observe and enjoy consciously and at will. This light does not receive in harmony into itself. You may enter the light as you become this light, and hence all perfection. One final reference. Following one of the many precipitated banquets which were drawn forth from the great sea of universal life that we were talking about today, he had this to say: the ascended masters have desired that you should see and partake of food drawn directly from this omnipresent cosmic substance, which is what has been explained to you as the pure electronic substance coursing throughout infinity, and out of which all forms have been created and all of manifestation produced. This limitless substance is everywhere about you, even now. It is yours to manipulate, to mold and shape into form without any limit whatsoever, when you can finally hold closely enough and sincerely enough and constantly enough without interruption to that glorious and angelic being, which is your mighty presence, the real you. That being who is constantly pouring its life into your physical brain and body. That being that is your individualized presence at your point in the universe, molding this cosmic substance into whatever form you decree. To those human beings who will not or who do not use and recognize this mighty presence, then the joy and the freedom of this great, bountiful, abundant life remains unused because they permit their feelings of fear, of doubt, of hatred, of anger, of selfishness, of lust, of ignorance, of rebellion, to build and to sustain as an impassable, impenetrable wall, which shuts out this greater light and power and perfection which would otherwise come through. Meanwhile, throughout the cosmos, the great, all-wise creator of perfect form continues everywhere throughout space to build form according to the patterns of perfection, which is another name for the law of love. This always refers to the orderly and harmonious way of the attraction by the power of the love of the heart to the individual who will acknowledge their presence and will take the determined stand with that presence, who will resolve to maintain in their feeling world the feeling of divine love. To that individual, all that you have seen done here is possible right now in this lifetime. We could go on, but hopefully you do get the idea that it is possible to enter into that God consciousness. It is already there in the true being whom you are. Your own mighty I Am presence is already living in that world. Likewise, your own Holy Christ self. Likewise, your own threefold flame right here within your physical heart is already living in that world of perfection. It is instantly and immediately available as the outer consciousness accepts it and learns the precepts, the golden precepts, adopts those precepts as the wise provisions whereby it uses life cleanly, purely, and in accordance with that will of that divine presence. All of this is there for all of you. I trust that you will begin to discover that there isn't a single thing that you really need that's healthy for you, that's actually good for you, that isn't to be found within the circle of your mighty I Am presence and the life that your presence leads. As you really awaken to this and learn that you're not going to be cheated of anything worthwhile out here in this world, and that there is a fullness of life expression that goes on, individuality that goes on, creativity of all sorts. Whatever is positive, all of that creativity is possible to every one of you. The goodness that you see in nature, the beauties of nature in mountains and streams and all of that is all testimony of this creative art that God is engaged in, that you are invited to participate with. This is why we truly do mean that the Ascended Masters are the lovers of life par excellence. I think that knowing this, you will choose their companionship and association above all others. Hopefully you will realize that they are more than ready. As El Moria says, we always stand ready. They're always ready to wing their way and stand by your side, not just when you've got problems to deal with, but each Ascended Master has something that is the love of their life. You might think about it like a divine hobby. It's a lot more than that. But you know when you are interested in something yourself, how you like to share it with other people. Sometimes people form clubs where they all are interested in the same thing. And even people who aren't interested in that, they want to share it. They want everyone else to experience that. Each Ascended Master has certain God attributes that they love to share. They're looking for any excuse to share their love for those qualities with you in your life. They don't have to be cajoled. They don't have to be bowed and scraped or implored. You just simply have to give them an open invitation through your heart's call and acceptance of their presence, and you will find them right there at the doorway of your heart, ready to pour forth the full measure of their love into your heart and your life. Are you ready to take their hands and go on this wonderful, enchanted journey up this golden ladder of the golden precepts, up the crystal ray of the Ascension Current into the heart of your own electronic body and start to live? Are you ready? Yes. Amen. Amen.